overview of 8051 family. And we can also talk about, first of all, we are going to look at a brief history of 8051 microcontroller. So basically, when you talk about the microcontroller here, then what we are going to be interested, there are several types of microcontrollers that are used, but our main interest is going to be 8051. So we are going to talk only about 8051, and maybe if much we can extend to other family members of 8051, of which we'll talk about later on. The 8051 is a microcontroller. It was developed in 1981 by Intel Corporation, and it is an 8-bit microcontroller. It is an 8-bit microcontroller. It has got 128 bytes of RAM, 4 kilobytes of on-chip ROM, 2 timers, 1 serial port, and 4 ports, of which each of them is 8 bits wide. And all these are on a single chip. At times, we usually refer to it as a system on chip. At times, we usually refer to it as a system on chip. And therefore, in essence, we are simply saying that 8051 is an 8-bit processor. That is, the CPU can work only on 8 bits of data at a time. And if you have data that is longer than 8 bits, then it has to be broken into 8-bit pieces for it to be processed by the CPU. The 8051 microcontroller usually has a total of 4 I/O ports, of which each of them is 8 bits wide. Although the 8051 can have a maximum of 64 kilobytes of on-chip ROM. And however, many manufacturers usually put only 4 kilobytes on the on-chip. Let's look at some of the features of the 8051. So let's look at some of the features of the 8051 microcontrollers. So when you talk about the summary features of 8051 microcontrollers, then we can talk of the summary features. So we can talk of the summary features of 8051 microcontroller. Summary features of 8051 microcontroller. One of them is, I'll just mentioning, let's talk of ROM. It has got what we call 4 kilobytes of ROM, 4K bytes. 4K bytes of ROM. And you can talk of RAM. RAM, we've talked about 128 bytes. 128 bytes of RAM. We can also talk of the timers. It has got 2 timers. It has got 2 input-output pins. It has 32, and also serial port. It has 1. Then we also have what we call the interrupt sources. Interrupt sources. It has 6. So those are majorly some of the features that are found in 8051 microcontroller. And the 8051 microcontroller is widely popular. And this one was because when Intel allowed the manufacturers to make several types of 8051, even though all these 8051 microcontrollers still remain code compatible. And this one led to very many versions of 8051 with different speeds and amounts of on-chip ROM. And this one was marketed by other manufacturers. And therefore, there are different types of 8051 in terms of speed and the amount of on-chip ROM, while they are all compatible with the original 8051 as far as the instructions are concerned. So what it means is that as long as you have 8051, the codes will be compatible, and also all the instructions of 8051 should be compatible with other, which means if you write a program in one of them, then regardless of the manufacturer, they should be able to run on any of them, regardless of the manufacturer. So we can look at other family members of 8051. So other members of 8051 family, other members of 8051 family. So when you look at the other members of 8051 family, majorly we have the original 8051, and then other members. The original 8051 is what we have been talking about, so we are just going to talk about the other members. That is the 8052 and also 8031. So 8052 and 8031. So we are going to look at the features of 8052 as well as 8031. So we are going to start by looking at 8052 microcontrollers. 8052 microcontrollers. 8052 microcontrollers. So when you talk about the 8052 microcontrollers, then the 8052 microcontroller usually has several features that 8051 has, but there are some slight or small difference that exists between the two. Like when you talk of the 8051, when you talk of the 8051, 8051 usually has 128 bytes. But now when you come to 8052, it has got extra 128 bytes of RAM, an extra timer, and that is to say, in a nutshell, that is to say that 8052 has got 256 bytes of RAM and also additional one timer, which makes the total number of timers to be 3. It also has 8 kilobytes of on-chip program ROM instead of 4 kilobytes, and that is now what distinguishes the 8052 from 8051, and therefore we can simply say that 8051 is a subset of 8052, and therefore all programs that are written in the 8051 will always run in 8052, but not vice versa, because as we can see there that 8052 has got some features that are superior to 8051, and that one makes or not on makes it true, because if the program will require several timers, like 8052 has got 3 while 8051 has got 1, then of course the program will not be you will not be in a position to run that program in 8051 because of the superior nature of 8052. The other one we can talk about is 8030 microcontroller as a family member of 8051. 8030 microcontroller. So this one is majorly it is always referred to as ROM-less 8051. It usually referred to as ROM-less 8051 since it has got 0 kilobytes of on-chip ROM. And therefore, to use this chip, you must always add an external ROM to it. And this external ROM must contain the program that 8031 will fetch and execute. It must contain a program that 8051 will fetch and execute. And contrast to the 8051, in which the on-chip ROM contains the program to be fetched and executed, it is limited only to 4 kilobytes of code. And the ROM containing the program attached to 8031 can be as large as 64 bytes. And as we add this external ROM, that is in the process of adding the external ROM to 8031, you will always lose the 2 ports, and that one leaves only 2 ports. That one means that the major difference that will exist is that there will be reduced number of ports from 4 to 2 when you talk of the 8031. And that one is the major difference that is always between 8031 and 8051 microcontrollers. So in order to solve this problem, you are supposed to add an external input-output to the 8031. So those are the major family members of the 8031 of the 8051 microcontrollers. I want us to look at now the various 8051 microcontrollers that exist in the market, and also a little bit of their manufacturers. So we can talk of the various 8051 microcontrollers. Various 8051 microcontrollers. So when you talk about the various 8051 microcontrollers, then, before we can talk about that, let's look at the summary features. Summary features. I hope you will remove that. Let's look at the summary features of these particular class members. So we can talk of the comparison of the 8051 family members. Comparison of the 8051 family members. Comparison of the 8051 family members. So in that case, we can talk about the feature. We can have feature here. Then we can have 8051, 8052, and then 8031. So when you talk about the features, we are going to look at the ROM, which is on-chip program space in bytes, on-chip program space in bytes. Then we have the RAM. That one also is in bytes. Then we have the timers. Then we have I/O pins. Then we have the serial port. Then we have the interrupt sources. So we are going to look at the comparison as far as these ones are concerned. So the first comparison that we are going to look at is in terms of the ROM. So when we looked at the 8051, we did say that the 8051 has the amount of ROM that it has. We said that it has got 4 kilobytes of ROM. This one has got 8 kilobytes, and the 8031 we referred to it as ROMless, which means it has got 0. When we talk of the bytes, we said that the RAM, when you talk of the RAM, we say that this one has got 128. This 8052 has got additional 128, which means we have 256, while that one remains 128. When you talk of the timers, the number of timers that this one has, it is 2. Then 8052 had additional timer of 3, while that one remains as 8051. So it has got 2 timers for the 8031. Another one is the I/O pins, that is the input-output pins for this. So if you talk of the I/O pins, there is no change in all. So this one has got 32, this one has 32, that one has 32. So all of them have got 32 pins. Then we have the serial port. All of them again have got 1 serial port each. And then the interrupt sources. This one has got 6 interrupt sources, the 8051. This one has got 8 interrupt sources, while this one has got 6 interrupt sources. So that one will give you a clear picture of the comparison that is between 8051 family members, that is 8051, the original, 8052, as well as the 8031. As well as the 8031. So that one is the comparison of the 8051 family members. So we can look at the various 8051 microcontrollers. Various 8051 microcontrollers. The various 8051 microcontrollers. So when you talk of the various 8051 microcontrollers, then we are simply talking about how do the microcontrollers of 8051 exist in the market, because you will really see 8051 as a part number, This is because they are always available in different memory types. The memory types that they are available in usually include the UV EPROM. You also have some of them exist in terms of the flash, and others exist in terms of the NVRAM, of which all of these usually have different part numbers. Like, for example, when you talk of the UV EPROM version of the 8051, it is always 8751. The flash ROM version, which is always marketed by many companies, that is including Atmel Corporation and also the Dallas Semiconductors. The Atmel flash is usually called the 8089C51, while the Dallas Semiconductor usually call their microcontroller as DS89C4XO. So there are several ways by which they are called or they are marketed, the part numbers. So you should not go looking for 8051 microcontroller in the market. They usually have different part numbers depending on the memory type. So those ones are some of the various 8051 microcontrollers. So let's look at summary features of what 8051 usually has. So let's talk of the summary features of the standard 8051 microcontroller. So we are just summarizing. So the summary features of the standard 8051 microcontroller, of the standard 8051 microcontroller. The standard summary features of 8051 microcontroller. So the first feature that you can talk about is that it has got 4 kilobytes internal ROM. So 4K bytes internal ROM. Another feature that it has is 128 bytes internal RAM. 128 bytes internal RAM. 128 bytes internal RAM. The other one is 4 8-bit I/O ports. 4 8-bit I/O ports. 4 8-bit I/O ports. We also have 2 16-bit timers. 2 16-bit timers. 2 16-bit timers. We also have a serial port. Serial port, or we can call it a serial interface into bracket port. We can also talk of 64 external code memory space. 64 kilobyte external code memory space. Then we can also have what we call 64K external data memory space. 64K external data memory space. Then from there we can also have another feature, which is 210-bit addressable locations. 210-bit addressable locations. 210-bit addressable locations. And also we can also talk of 6 interrupt sources. 6 interrupt sources. 6 interrupt sources. So those ones are the summary features that if maybe somebody asks you to give features of 8051 microcontroller, you should be in a position to give those features.